movies always end with the victory feast, the firelight, the roaring laughter, the glitter of gold spilling across wooden tables. But what happens after the music fades, after the torches burn low, and silence settles over the smoldering ruins of a conquered land? That is where the real story begins. A story not of warriors and kings, but of the women left behind, the queens, the princesses, the daughters of chieftains, whose names once carried power. For them, conquest was not an ending, it was a sentence. Tonight, we go where history books often whisper, into the shadows left behind by Viking victories. These are not tales of romance or rescue. They are accounts of survival, of identity torn from bloodlines, of names erased from record, yet echoing faintly through the centuries. Our first story begins in the year 821, along the mist-covered coast of Ireland, in a settlement called Etar, today known as Hoth. The entry in the annals of Ulster is chillingly brief. It reads only, Etir was plundered by the heathens, and they carried off a great number of women into captivity. Just that, a single line. No names, no faces, no memory. But hidden inside that single sentence lies a world of terror. Etar was no ordinary village. It was a fortified coastal hub, home to Ireland's nobles and merchants. When Viking longships emerged from the fog, they came not for silver or livestock. They came for people, for the most valuable resource of the ninth century, human life. Imagine the sound, the clash of shields, the cries of families torn apart, the smoke choking the morning sky. Within hours, noble women were stripped of everything, titles, language, identity, and reclassified under Norse law as thralls, human property. To the Vikings, these women were not trophies of war. They were currency. A young woman of strong health could be traded for silver, worth an entire farmstead's yearly yield. From the decks of the long ships, they were carried across the cold Atlantic, bound for Dublin, or what the Norse called Dyflin. There, on the muddy banks of the River Liffey, stood one of the largest slave markets in Western Europe. For many of these women, that was where their stories ended, their heritage traded like livestock, their memories absorbed into the machinery of empire. The record doesn't name a single one of them, and perhaps that was intentional. Erasure was part of the conquest. The Vikings understood something chilling. When you erase a name, you erase a legacy. But not all names were lost. Some survived, whispered in sagas centuries later, like that of Melkorka, daughter of an Irish king. Around the year 956, her world was shattered by a Viking raid. Captured and sold in Norway, she was purchased by a wealthy Icelandic chieftain named Hoskold. He saw her beauty and poise and paid an enormous sum for her, 24 ounces of silver, 3 times the value of a prized cow. From that moment, her silence began. Melkorka did not speak, not to her captor, not to his household, not for years. Her silence became her only weapon, her only way to protect what little of herself remained. In the sagas, it's said everyone believed her mute. But one day, Hoskold overheard her whispering to her young son, teaching him a language no one else understood, Gaelic. In that moment, the illusion shattered. He demanded the truth, and she told him. She was the daughter of Muirchertach, King of Ireland. Her silence had not been weakness, it had been defiance. Though her status improved after that revelation, she was never freed. She lived and died in Iceland, a queen in name only, thousands of miles from the homeland she was born to rule. Her son, Olaf the Peacock, would become one of Iceland's most powerful chieftains, but his mother, Sesgrave, lay in foreign soil, bought, hidden, and remembered only because she was overheard. Melkorka's story gives a face to the forgotten, a single spark in a sea of extinguished lives. Yet, for others, even death became a choice, a final act of control. The year was 870. The winds howled along the Northumbrian coast of Scotland. On a lonely cliff stood the monastery of Coldingham, home to a community of monks and nuns led by a woman named Ebba the Younger. When word came that the great heathen army, led by the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, was marching north, she knew what awaited them. Viking raids on monasteries were infamous, not just for plunder, but for desecration. Ebba gathered her sisters and faced a truth too heavy to bear. They could not run, and they would not survive what was coming. So, she made a decision that defied every instinct of life. She took a blade, and in a single act of fierce courage, destroyed the very thing the invaders sought, beauty itself. Her sisters followed her lead, each disfiguring themselves to become unrecognizable. When the Viking army finally broke through the monastery gates, they found not trembling victims, but women who had already chosen their fate. Enraged by what they saw, the invaders set the building ablaze, burning the entire community alive. Their choice was not between life and death. It was between two kinds of death, one that took their bodies and one that took their souls. Ebba and her sisters chose the fire. Their ashes became part of the cliffside soil, mingled with the wind and sea, eternal witnesses to what happens when faith meets horror. But this was not an isolated story. Across the British Isles, the same pattern played out. Cities fallen, churches looted, noble families shattered. In the year 1011, the city of Canterbury fell to the Danes under Thorkel the Tall, its cathedral burned, its archbishop taken, and its noblewomen, the abbesses, the leaders of holy houses, were turned into bargaining chips, held hostage for silver. The ransom demanded was unimaginable, 48,000 ounces of silver, enough to buy peace, at least for a time. Their lives became part of that payment, calculated, weighed, exchanged, captured, ransomed, forgotten. If you value stories like these, the ones buried beneath the triumphs of history, take a moment to subscribe. It helps keep this kind of documented storytelling alive, and it ensures that voices once erased are finally heard again. Because the deeper we go, the darker it gets. And in the next chapter, we travel even further to the cold heart of the Viking world itself, where the women of entire kingdoms vanished into the fog, and even in death, their chains remained. What happened to them after the ships returned to the fjords? What rituals awaited them in foreign soil? The answers lie not in legend, but in graves. The longships return home, their prows carved like beasts, their hulls heavy not only with gold, but with silence. Behind the triumphal songs of victory, another cargo was being carried across the North Atlantic. Human souls. It is easy to romanticize the Vikings, to see them as bold explorers and fearless warriors. But beneath that legend lies something colder. The foundation of their world was not just built on conquest, but on captivity. And at its heart were women, women taken, traded, and absorbed into a new society where even in death their stories remained bound. In the late ninth century, the Landnámabók, the Icelandic Book of Settlements, described the peopling of a new world. Iceland was, on paper, a land of freedom, a place for those fleeing tyranny, seeking independence and self rule. But read closer, and you'll find that its freedom was built on the enslavement of others. The settlers, who claimed the volcanic valleys and icy fjords, didn't come alone. They brought captives, most of them Irish or Scottish women taken in raids. The sagas mention them briefly as footnotes, servants, or wives taken overseas. But modern DNA tells the truth that the texts do not. While the majority of Iceland's men had Norse ancestry, nearly two-thirds of the founding women were of Celtic origin. That means the mothers of Iceland, the women who raised its first generation, were not Norse by blood. They were the descendants of kingdoms conquered and homes destroyed. Imagine what that meant, to be torn from green Irish hills and brought to a land of ice and volcanic ash, to speak a language no one understood, to raise children who would grow up worshiping the gods of your captors. They became the quiet architects of a new world, shaping a culture that forgot their names but inherited their blood, plundered, transported, replanted, and yet even among those who lived in privilege, freedom was an illusion. In 1904, archaeologists digging near the Oslo Fjord in Norway uncovered a mound so vast it seemed almost mythical. Inside was a perfectly preserved Viking ship, its carved prow curling like a serpent, frozen mid-strike. The Oseberg ship. Within it lay two women, one elderly, regal, powerful, likely a queen or a priestess, the other younger, around 50. For decades, it was assumed she was a trusted servant, perhaps even a willing companion, sacrificed to follow her mistress into the afterlife. But modern science has begun to unravel a much darker truth. DNA tests revealed something extraordinary. The younger woman carried a genetic signature, not from Scandinavia, but from the lands around the Black Sea, possibly what is now Iran or Georgia. She was not born in the north. She had been brought there. Her bones told the rest of the story, her diet changing suddenly near the end of her life, her body showing signs of a life abruptly elevated from poverty to privilege. The conclusion is as haunting as it is clear. She was a captive, a noblewoman from a faraway land, taken in a raid, forced into servitude within a powerful Norse household. And when her mistress died, she was killed or offered to serve in death as she had in life, bound, buried, forgotten. This single discovery turned one of the world's most beautiful burial sites into a tomb of horror, not because of what was done, but because of what it meant. The ship was not just a vessel for the afterlife, it was a monument to ownership, a symbol of how completely one life could consume another. Even death could not unbind her. For centuries, these women's names disappeared from history. The chronicles spoke of kings and conquests, of burning towns and fallen warriors. But look closer, and you see the pattern. Each victory entry marked by a simple, terrible phrase. They carried off many women. The Annals of Ulster, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the Chronicle of the Kings of Alba. Over and over, those words appear like ghosts between the lines. Their stories were never meant to survive, but the soil remembers. In 2009, in Dorset, England, archaeologists uncovered a pit filled with the bones of 54 young men, Vikings, all executed, their heads severed and piled to one side. It was a rare moment, when the conquerors became the conquered. But even in that moment of reversal, the contrast was staggering. We find the bodies of Viking men, yet only the silences of their women. The ground of Europe is thick with the remains of both, but only one side is spoken of. That is the unspoken fate of noble women after Viking conquests, to vanish so completely that even memory turned against them. For every saga of heroism sung by a skald, there were hundreds of unnamed women whose voices became the wind that carried those songs. For every hall of gold, there was a hearth gone cold in the lands they left behind. And perhaps that is the deepest horror of all, not the violence itself, but the forgetting. History was written by the survivors, but not all who lived survived in memory. So, when you look upon the grand carvings of Norse ships or see the gleaming replicas in museums, remember this: their beauty hides bones. Their craftsmanship was paid for in lives that never returned home. The noble women of conquered kingdoms were not trophies of war. They were the silent scaffolding upon which the Viking age was built. Their stories were burned, buried, and sold, but not erased, because history, like the sea, always gives back what it takes, eventually. And as archaeologists unearth more graves, more ships, more bones, whispering secrets beneath the fjords, those lost voices begin to rise once again. If you followed this far, it means you felt it too. That quiet, lingering sorrow in the spaces between words. These are the echoes of lives the world chose to forget. Subscribe to help us keep uncovering them, to keep giving names back to the nameless. And as you leave this story behind tonight, I'll ask you this. When we remember the conquerors and forget the conquered, are we not repeating history? Silence ourselves? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done standing on that shore, watching the longships vanish into the fog? Because sometimes the darkest part of history is not what was done, but what was never told.